Welcome, everybody, to the 28th episode of the Paleoconnection. I'm Brandon, joined by Verv again, and today we have another blog post that we are going to be discussing. The blog post is titled IQ Shredders, and let me share what the concept of an IQ shredder is before me and Verv begin discussing it. So an IQ shredder is essentially a state, like a city-state, perhaps Singapore or Hong Kong, that attracts talent and high IQ people from around the world. These people go to places like Singapore or Hong Kong to have a better life, of course, and to have a safe environment, to get a nice, comfortable job with a high-paying salary. The problem is, and the problem starts, when they arrive. When they arrive, they typically do not have children. Therefore, the high IQ that they have been blessed with and born with is not so much passed down to their children. And this is a problem that is occurring in many wealthy places around the world. Let's be very specific on what an IQ shredder state entails. So there are 4 things specifically that are characteristics of an IQ shredder city state. Number 1, its level of civilization and social order is such that it is attractive to talented and competent people. Number 2, its immigration policy is unapologetically selective. Number 3, it sustains an economic structure that is remarkably effective at extracting productive activity from all available adults. And number 4, it is efficiently specialized within a wider commercial network to which it provides valuable goods and services, and from which it draws economic and demographic resources. In sum, it skims the human genetic stock regionally and even globally, in large part due to the exceptional opportunity it provides for the conversion of bio-privileged human capital into economic value. From a strictly capitalistic perspective, genetic quality is comparatively wasted anywhere else. Consequently, spontaneous currents of economic incentive suck in talent to optimize its exploitation. So those are the 4 characteristics of an IQ shredder, and the 2 city-states that are very good examples, as I mentioned, would be Singapore and Hong Kong. And this IQ shredding is certainly not just a characteristic of these city-states. It is a characteristic of many Western states and cities specifically. Wealthy cities that are in Western states, for example, New York City or London or Paris, Tokyo, Seoul, places that also in Asia, like in Korea and Japan, that attract talent increasingly from around the world and from around their own countries. And then when the people arrive, the birth rate falls. So that is the topic for discussion today. I'd like to bring Verv on now, and he can give us some comments and thoughts about the article. Verv?
Yeah, I was so excited to see this topic because it seems to really encapsulate the problem that we are having with the modern capitalist economy, and to hone in specifically on what it theoretically does to our collective IQ. This, of course, is because it seems to be the case that IQ or intelligence is something that's largely heritable. And if you were to jump onto Wikipedia today, you would find the sentence, twin studies of adult individuals have found a heritability of IQ between 57 and 73%, with the most recent study showing heritability for IQ as high as 80%. And so the trend has been to affirm this idea that your IQ is something that's largely determined by your genetics. And so if this is the case, even when we're focusing only on productivity, we've created the scenario where even on a national level, we take our people who are most talented, we offer them the best jobs in places like Silicon Valley or New York, if you're in the United States, or in places like Seoul in Korea. And it results in people going to parts of the country where it's most expensive and prohibitive to have children. And then, of course, on a global scale, you have Hong Kong and Singapore sucking up a lot of talent. And then you can also imagine how the most talented people in places like Russia, India, China, they do move internationally. And, even if you're the most talented person in a very developed country like Italy, you still might find yourself moving to London or Silicon Valley. So we're really looking at a situation where capitalism puts this sort of selection pressure on these corporations to get the greatest talent. And this selection pressure, oddly enough, prevents some of the people who we would think of as being most fit to have as many children as they want. They are actually now having no children, right? So you could view it as capitalism itself is kind of negatively impacting what we would refer to as, natural selection as we'd like to see it play out. This is, of course, not that politically correct to say, but hey, it's dulce per culum, love of danger, right? So what are your thoughts on this, Brand?
Yeah, the things that we're saying here aren't necessarily things that we hold true, and we're kind of just talking and throwing out, things that come to the top of our head sometimes, or things that we've sort of thought about, but we haven't really, fleshed out. So, I wouldn't hold us to any of the things that we're saying here. That's sort of the reason for the discussion in the first place, to try to figure out what the causes are and what the solutions might be. So with that being said, I'd like to say one thing that I think is one of the causes of this. It's not something that is politically correct as well, and it's certainly not an opinion that I hold firmly, but I think it is somewhat the idea that we have more women in the workplace. And basically everything that Verv has said so far, and what I've said, seems to indict capitalism as the issue, and it certainly does have a lot of problems in lowering birth rates and stuff around the world. But I do also believe that if we could imagine a society that was a capitalistic society where there were less women in the workplace, let's say go back to 60 years ago, 70 years ago, where mostly the men were working and the women were staying at home, I think we could probably solve many of the world's birth rate problems. Now, this is sort of like, Pandora's box. I guess we've already opened it, or the cat is out of the bag. I don't think we can put the cat in the bag, or perhaps we can. I think there's one solution that I'll offer a little bit later as a way to perhaps combat this. But women, of course, are here to stay in the workplace. And, women obviously contribute a lot to the workplace. But we are facing population crises here. The statistics I've seen say that by the year 2100, many countries around the world, including Russia, Japan, Korea, the UK, Italy, their populations will be halved. So you imagine a Japan right now of around 110, 120 million people. Imagine a Japan of only 60 million people in the year 2100. It's hard to believe this sort of, doomsday scenario, but that's what the statistics show unless we have a radical change. So by talking about maybe encouraging women to not join the workforce, it is a solution I think that needs to be, put on the table because If not, then we're facing crises here. And in a crisis situation, I think all options should be on the table. Do you have any thoughts about that, Verb? Do you think that's totally out of line here, or do you think that possibly withdrawing a large percentage of women from the workforce with incentives? Of course, I'm not just saying we force them, to stay at home in the house barefoot. Offering incentives to bring them back home, in my opinion, it kills two birds with one stone. I think it opens up the labor market and it makes it less competitive for men, which I think it would give workers the advantage again, and I think wages might rise. We could have, a one-parent working household where the wife could stay at home, and we have more kids to boot. So, I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's an absolutely great idea. One of the reasons that I definitely think it's what we should be really seriously considering is what you could do, or when you look at IQ distribution between the genders. And so one of the things I always wondered as a kid is, why do you see all these homeless men? Why are so many of the homeless men, especially the bums that you would see begging on the streets? And one of the reasons for this is actually because men have a much more diverse dispersal of IQ, and also of, I guess, a lot of, we have a lot more mental health issues than women tend to have. Women kind of have this trend in their IQ, dispersion, where they're mostly centered around the average. An abnormal amount of women are really centered around that IQ 100 average point. And the further you get away from 100, whether you're at 70 or 140, the fewer women are showing up as a proportion of that number. So that tells us that the number of people who have these big brain IQs who do get recruited to go to Singapore or New York City or Silicon Valley, they are going to be disproportionately male. So as a result, it seems that encouraging women to take more traditional homemaker career path would not be bad at all, because as it stands, by putting all the women in the workforce and emphasizing this as an extremely important thing, we're not really negatively impacting these extremely hard to find IQ 140 positions. What we're really kind of doing is we're telling a lot of women who work very regular jobs just like me, that maybe it's more important for them to have 3 or 4 children, be a mother, than it is for them being, somebody who works a very regular middle class job that is probably much less fulfilling than being a homemaker. So I completely agree with you in that regard.
Yeah, you're exactly right about the IQ distribution. The tail ends are dominated by men, right? So that means, there's more genius men, but there's also more complete idiot men, right? And I think that's what the point you were making, right? Where those complete idiot men, the ones with the really low IQs, the ones with the mental issues, they're the ones on the streets. Whereas the women are more, they have more of the bell-shaped. It's not as flattened. The curve is not as flattened. It's more it raises up towards the center.
I'm relieved you said that for me, because I was really I was kind of butchering that part of me. You said that much more succinctly and better than me. Thank you. To touch on that slightly, just a little bit more, one of the other interesting things for you to think about is that men also tend to be more oriented towards STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And these are the sort of jobs that do tend to pay a lot more. And women are more attracted to jobs that are heavy on socialization. So one of the things that you could even think about is potentially orienting a lot of younger women to being homemakers, but also going into things like psychology and being social workers, and kind of shifting things like psychology and social work into things that would be more beneficial to women, in the sense that they would be able to now work. They would now be able to work half the day or so, or change their numbers up a little bit, so that they would be able to do a lot more different kind of work.
So yeah, one of the things that we have to understand here, right, is, and I know it's part of modern society. It seems like we're trying to get rid of this part of life, but and by that I mean the biological factors that we cannot get rid of, right? There's certain parts of biology that we just have to face and we cannot change. Now, if it was the fact that men were the ones that were able to get pregnant and have babies, then I would reverse everything I'm saying here and say that men should be the ones to be encouraged to stay home and to take care of the children and to feed the children and so on and so forth. But just the sheer biological fact is that men aren't the ones who do that, right? Women are the ones who are saddled with that biological. I mean, it's a blessing, really. It's not a curse. We should see it as a blessing. So due to that, I think it's very wise to, follow biology as best we can. It doesn't mean that that's the right path for every woman. Of course it's not. But I think we need to take a better look at that. And if we didn't have the media propaganda telling women that they need to work, you're not a true woman unless you work 80 hours a week and hate your job or something like that. Well, if we had in the media the push for women to, work a part-time job and to stay at home and raise children, then I think people's views would change. I think it's just all a matter of media attention and propaganda. But I don't see that changing in the West anytime soon. But with this population crisis, I think it has to be considered. And I mentioned before that I would offer a solution to this issue. And I think one of the things we could do, and it's not, something I, made up, it's something that's been out there for a while, is just the fact that I think we should pay women to be stay-at-home moms. So I think women should be encouraged to be stay-at-home moms. And I think if we're going to have a larger role of the state, which it seems like it's just inevitable, I'm typically not a person who enjoys a large role of the state. But if we're going to push in that direction, then one of the things I think we could offer is money for women to stay at home. And I'm not just saying money if you have a kid. For each kid you get this amount of money. No, something just more general, like a larger sum of money for women to stay home and be homemakers. Now, of course, you have to have kids to qualify for this money, and I don't know the amount of money, what amount of money would be, a good first step. But I think by offering programs like this, we give money to women who stay at home, and we show them that this is not something that is a shame. It's something that you can be proud of, and you will even be paid for it. So that's sort of the solution, I guess. And there's probably many other solutions that one could offer, but that seems to be a very simple one that could convince perhaps millions of women even into staying at home.
Right. I think we're actually naturally heading towards that with universal basic income, which is sort of a topic that many of us conservatives tend to oppose. But in reality, it might actually be the means to us restoring some kind of more traditional balance. So I've learned to talk about UBI a little bit differently than I used to. I used to lean towards much more traditional capitalist conservatism type things. But since we are entering kind of a new era, and as we already hit on, maybe one of the issues that has negatively impacted us is the amount of people in the workforce, the prominence of women in the workforce. We could look towards things like UBI as a means to readjusting the economy and putting it back into some sort of semblance of balance, and also increasing our fertility rate, going back to where this crisis really is, with the lack of people that will be being born, specifically also with the lack of people being born that might have and this is politically incorrect, the genetic characteristics that would make them ideal for a high-skilled labor workforce.
Yeah, the fertility rates are very depressing if you look at them worldwide. The worldwide fertility rate is 2.4 births per woman, and you, of course, need to have 2.1 births per woman to be able to replenish your population. Um, just about I think every single OECD country, certainly every wealthy Western country aside from Israel is below that 2.1 number. Israel is, I think, at like 3.3, and I was reading up on that and why that possibly is, and it has a lot to do with, well, there's a lot of factors. One, Jewish people just have the sense that they need to, repopulate their numbers. It's sort of something that they're sort of taught throughout childhood, and they can't let their race go extinct and so on and so forth. But it also has to do with the fact that the ultra Orthodox Jews have like 7 or 8 children, which sort of skews the results. But even the atheist Jews in Israel have a average birth rate of, I think, 2.6 or something like that. It's higher than the 2.4 world average. So Israel's really the only country that is actually above that world average and above the replenishment 2.1 rate. So we have huge issues in the entire world, essentially. Even China's numbers. China's supposed to go from 1.2 billion to around 800 million. Their population is going to drastically drop. It's just all of the poor countries in Africa and places in South America that are going to be seeing massive population growth. So if we have a globalized world with a globalized economy, we are going to be seeing a lot more immigrants from Africa and from South America coming to the wealthier nations just to keep their population levels at appropriate rates. You can't have a generous welfare program if you have nobody working to pay for, the old people to get their free medical services and their Social Security. And
Exactly right.
I'm kind of seeing a future predicament right now, and I could see how race will come into this, and it will be something like, I can see the headlines now. Western European countries have neo-slavery with the older white population living off the welfare and the African immigrant population paying all the taxes to fund their welfare programs that they are benefiting from. I can see the headlines now, 40, 50 years down the line. And it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for anyone in the world. It's not a good thing for Africa. For we were just talking about IQ shredding. We need to have the people with the highest IQs in Africa staying in their countries to build their countries up.
Exactly.
If they just are if they're in this never-ending loop where they just send their best and brightest abroad to work in Western wealthy countries or Asian wealthy countries, then Africa will be forever poor. So yeah, it doesn't work well for anyone.
Correct. One of the other things to consider is that other things in the economy, just like real estate, are incredibly impacted by the fall in the fertility rate, because one of the ways people save for the future, one of the most basic ways they save, is they invest highly in the place where they live. But if nobody is around to buy these places anymore, it results in their value going down drastically. Moreover, you run into the issue of there just being a lack of consumers who are out there actually consuming the products that people are making. It really is an absolute catastrophe. And I think one of the most surprising things we're going to see over the next 30 years is we're going to see a lot more of the elites who pushed against traditional values trying to revive these things as they realize that the profit margins that they see are going to decrease drastically if they don't do something. And moreover, the everyday regular people who oppose these changes are going to be very uncooperative with the agenda going forward. So those are my final thoughts on this overall. I guess I will leave it at that. Do you have anything else to say, Brandon?
Yeah, I'll just close with the thought that, we're talking about a population crisis in the future. Fertility rates are drastically dropping. Places like Korea, there's headlines saying that Koreans will be extinct, in 70 years, just like ridiculous headlines. But they're all based on models that predict, given a fertility rate that stays the same, well, it could hold true. So with that being said, right, we do need to think about all options. We need to put everything on the table, and we do need to determine what our best options are. We cannot just say, well, let's not do that because that's politically incorrect. Well, what's politically incorrect now? 40 years down the line, when your population has been cut by 50%, you might not be thinking about political correctness at that point. So I think I will end with that, and thank you all for listening, and we will see you guys on the next episode of the Paleoconnection. Thank you.